$2 billion. That's how much the United States burned every single day during the opening strikes of Operation Epic Fury. Not per month, not per week, per day. And the bill? It's coming straight out of your paycheck. Right now, the Pentagon is reviewing plans to send 10,000 more troops to the Middle East. That sounds like a military decision. But what if I told you it's actually a financial one? And it's about to reshape your rent, your student loans, and your retirement? The most shocking part of this story comes at the very end, and I promise you, it's not what you expect. In the next 12 minutes, we're going to do something no cable news network will do. We're going to follow the money. From the $1 trillion defense budget all the way down to the price of eggs in your grocery store. We'll trace exactly how a war 7,000 miles away is silently draining the U.S. Treasury. Why the math behind tariff-funded warfare completely falls apart. And what it means when your government chooses missiles over Medicare. This isn't speculation. These are the numbers. And they tell a story that should terrify every American taxpayer. To understand where we are, you need to understand where we were. Rewind to early 2025. The U.S. economy was humming. Inflation had cooled to around 2.4%. The stock market was riding near all-time highs. Gas was hovering around $3.20 a gallon. Meet Jay. Jay's a 32-year-old electrician in Ohio. He drives 40 minutes to work every day, fills up his truck for about $55 a week. Predictable. Comfortable. He's even started putting an extra $200 a month toward his student loans, hoping to knock them out by 2028. His wife just got approved for a better health insurance plan through the ACA marketplace. Life wasn't perfect, but for Jay, the math was finally working. The federal deficit, while large, was stabilizing. Interest rates were easing. There was even talk of expanded student debt relief programs and infrastructure spending. America felt like it was catching its breath after years of post-pandemic turbulence. But here's the thing about calm waters. They make you forget that storms exist, and the storm that was coming would make everything Jay had built feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. What nobody saw coming was how fast the dominoes would fall. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military campaign targeting Iran's nuclear facilities and energy infrastructure. Within 72 hours, the U.S. had deployed carrier strike groups, launched over 400 cruise missiles, and begun establishing air superiority over the Strait of Hormuz. The burn rate was staggering, nearly $2 billion a day in the opening phase. To put that in perspective, that's roughly what the entire state of Vermont spends in a year, gone in 24 hours. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a credit card with a $100,000 limit. Now imagine swiping it 67 times a second. That's the pace at which the U.S. Treasury was hemorrhaging cash. And here's where the financial earthquake begins. The 2026 defense budget had already crossed the $1 trillion threshold for the first time in American history. That's roughly 3.3% of GDP dedicated purely to military spending. But President Trump didn't stop there. He's now pushing for $1.5 trillion for 2027. That's a 50% increase in just one budget cycle. Where is this money coming from? The administration says tariffs, but the Congressional Budget Office ran the numbers, and they don't lie. Tariff revenue covers roughly half of the military expansion costs. The rest? Pure deficit spending. We're putting a war on a credit card with a 28% interest rate. And the truly terrifying part? I'll reveal that shortly. But first, you need to understand what this means for the one resource every American depends on: energy. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway, barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point. And roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. When Operation Epic Fury began targeting Iranian military installations along the strait, global oil markets didn't just react, They panicked. Brent crude spiked past $120 a barrel within the first week. By mid-March 2026, prices are hovering near $130. That translates directly to the pump. Gas prices across America have surged past $5.50 a gallon in most states, with some areas in California hitting $7. Remember Jay, our electrician in Ohio? His weekly fill-up just jumped from $55 to over $90. That's an extra $140 a month, vanishing from his budget like smoke. And it's not just gas. When oil prices spike, everything gets more expensive. The diesel that trucks use to deliver your groceries? Up 30%. The jet fuel that moves your Amazon packages? Up 25%. The natural gas that heats your home? Climbing fast. Economists call this a supply-side inflation shock. I call it a money-eating machine. Every dollar oil goes up. It ripples through the entire economy like a stone dropped in a pond. Now, the administration argues that controlling Hormuz is precisely the point, that once the U.S. secures the strait, prices will stabilize. But here's the historical reality. The U.S. occupied Iraq for nearly a decade. Oil prices didn't stabilize. They tripled. If the U.S. had invested even a fraction of its military budget into domestic energy independence over the past 2 decades, reducing Middle East oil dependency to 50%. Today's gas prices would be roughly 70 cents cheaper per gallon. That's over $1,000 a year back in Jay's pocket. Instead, we're spending billions to secure a choke point that wouldn't matter if we'd planned ahead. But the scariest part of this financial story isn't the oil. It's what's happening to the money you'll never see. Here's the part that keeps economists up at night. When the government borrows money to fund a war, it doesn't just add to the national debt. It triggers a cascade of financial consequences that most people never see. As of March 2026, the U.S. national debt stands at roughly $37 trillion. The annual interest payment on that debt has crossed $1.2 trillion. Let me say that again. We are spending $1.2 trillion a year just on interest. Not on schools, not on roads, not on veterans, just on the privilege of owing money. That's more than the entire defense budget was 5 years ago. Now layer on top of that a war that's adding hundreds of billions in new borrowing. Every additional dollar of debt means higher interest payments, which means less money for everything else. It's like paying the minimum on your credit card while taking out a new loan to buy a sports car. The math only works until it doesn't, and here's the hidden mechanism that makes this a direct tax on you. When the government floods the bond market with new Treasury securities to fund the war, it pushes interest rates up across the board. Your mortgage rate goes up. Your car loan gets more expensive. Your credit card APR climbs. A 0.25% rate hike doesn't sound like much, right? But for the average American household carrying $104,000 in debt, that's an extra $260 a year. That's 2 fewer family dinners out every single month, vanishing from your life without anyone in Washington even mentioning it. The Federal Reserve is trapped. Cut rates to help consumers, and you risk fueling the inflation that war spending is already creating. Raise rates to fight inflation, and you crush the housing market and small businesses. It's a lose-lose scenario manufactured entirely by policy choices. Now, let me ask you something. How are you feeling this in your own life? Are your bills creeping up in ways you can't quite explain? Because there's a direct line between a missile launched over Tehran and the interest rate on your next car payment. And the people making these decisions? They're not the ones feeling the squeeze. Ironically, when defense spending surges, the biggest winners aren't soldiers or taxpayers. They're defense contractors whose stock prices have climbed over 40% since February. Let's bring this home to where it hurts. Jay's been paying down his student loans for 3 years. He had a plan, but now his gas bill is up $140 a month. His groceries cost 20% more. His wife's health insurance premium just increased because federal subsidies for ACA marketplace plans are being quietly trimmed to offset defense spending. That extra $200 a month he was putting toward his student loans? Gone. He's back to minimum payments. His payoff date just moved from 2028 to 2033. 5 more years of debt. 5 more years of interest. Thousands of dollars in additional payments. All because of a war he never voted for. And Jay isn't alone. Across the country, the squeeze is real. Student loan relief programs that were under discussion in 2025 are now politically dead. There's no budget room. Medicare and Medicaid are facing proposed cuts of up to $800 billion over the next decade to help offset military spending. Infrastructure bills are stalled. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave U.S. infrastructure a C- grade. It's not getting better. Former Treasury official Mark Zandi put it bluntly, quote, "Every dollar allocated to an overseas military campaign is a dollar subtracted from domestic economic resilience," end quote. This isn't abstract economics. This is your life getting more expensive, your future getting less secure, and your government telling you it's necessary. So let me ask you directly, what would you cut? Would you cut the aircraft carrier or the children's hospital? Because right now, that's the choice being made for you, without your input and largely without your knowledge. History has a pattern, and it's not subtle. Every great power that overextended militarily eventually paid the price at home. Rome, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union. They didn't collapse on the battlefield. They collapsed at the treasury. By 2035, the combined cost of servicing our national debt, funding an aging population, and maintaining a global military presence will consume virtually every dollar the federal government collects in taxes. That's not a prediction. That's the trajectory we're on right now, today, in March 2026. The question isn't whether we can afford this war. The question is whether we can afford what comes after. A generation saddled with debt they didn't choose. An infrastructure crumbling beneath their feet. A healthcare system rationed not by need, but by what's left over after the Pentagon gets its share. The most expensive weapon in America's arsenal was never a stealth bomber or an aircraft carrier. It's the compounding interest on the debt we're creating right now. And unlike a missile, that weapon doesn't detonate once. It detonates every single day, for decades, long after the last soldier comes home. If this breakdown opened your eyes, hit subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. The more people who understand the real math behind this war, the harder it becomes to ignore. Drop a comment below. Tell me, how is this hitting your wallet? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.